Attention, citizens. It's time for Super Pulp Science.
Welcome to Super Pulp Science, where we talk about how genre gets made. I am producer Dan, and today we're going to go back to last Halloween when we held the FanQuest virtual Halloween ball. Part of that online event was a horror panel that is a collection of creatives who have worked in the genre of horror, writing books, creating graphic novels, and of course making horror movies. So this is Gregory Kamichuk. It is Dr. Jonathan Ball, who's been on the podcast before, and it is Steven Kostanski, who is a Winnipeg-born filmmaker now working in Toronto. We talk about all that stuff. It's a great discussion about what is my favorite genre. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Excellent. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the FanQuest virtual Halloween ball. My name is Dan Vadeboncoeur, and we are very, very lucky to be joined by some scary guys, some spooky, scary guys. We have Steven Kostanski, filmmaker, special effects makeup artist, and just all-around creepy guy. I'm sorry, Steve. I'm just going to call you creepy because you make a lot of creepy stuff. That's what your job is, and you've got a very cute dog there. What's your dog's name?
This is Thumbelina.
Thumbelina.
And then the other dog, Bebop, is roaming around right now. He may bark occasionally, so just a heads up.
And you're in Toronto. Just let everyone know you are in Toronto?
Yes, I'm in Toronto right now.
How are things out there?
It's okay. I actually just got back a few days ago. I was out in BC working on Day of the Dead, the show.
Oh, wow.
And, so for like 12 weeks, I was just deep in that. So I have a few week break now, and then I'm heading back out to Vancouver to do a little bit more work on that.
Cool.
But
very cool.
Yeah, I'm just taking a little break.
We'll get into that in a second. Next, we want to introduce, of course, G&B Kamichuk, or Gregory, as I'm going to call him for the rest of the panel, who's a graphic novelist based out of Winnipeg here. How you doing, Gregory?
I'm doing fine, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on here. And of course, you're a well-known comic creator here in the community, and you frequently delve into the world of horror in your pages. And you always seem to, not every time I have a conversation, quite often when I have a conversation with you, it goes in that direction. You like to explore the macabre, as they say.
It's just a cathartic release, Dan. It's all it is.
Well, that's what I want. Yeah, and that's what I want to get into as far as like, why do we love this stuff so much? And then our third panelist is Dr. Jonathan Ball, who's again, a Winnipeg-based writer. And you can follow, well, I should plug everybody's podcast while we're on here. Gregory's podcast is Super Pulp Science. Jonathan's podcast is Writing the Wrong Way. And Jonathan, of course, you've written many books about a variety of topics, but you certainly have said that to me many times that you love horror the most. That's your favorite genre.
I'm known as an experimental artist, but my contention is that horror is the most experimental genre for many reasons.
In any
medium, and that's why I kind of consider it the highest art in that sense, and where I like to kind of move my wheelhouse as much as I can.
Very cool. Okay, so what's going to happen here is we'll just have a conversation among ourselves, and people can comment their questions below. We have some of our great FanQuest community members monitoring the chat, and they'll forward. I can't really see it in this view when I'm on the Zoom call with you guys, so they'll be texting me any questions that come up. So we'll answer those as they come up. So if you guys have any questions for these guys, please leave them in the comments below. In the meantime, we'll just get right into this. What is the, we'll start with Steve, let's start with you and your history. We'll get a little bit of a history of each of you. What was your first introduction to horror, Steve? And how did you first fall in love with this genre?
As a kid, I was terrified of horror movies and just horror in general. I had a pretty weak stomach. I couldn't handle stuff that was too intense. I couldn't even go in the horror section. I have a distinct memory of going into Video King on Pembina Highway back in the early 90s. And they had a standee of Freddy Krueger from, I believe it was Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And it just scared the crap out of me. I couldn't go near it. And then as I got a little older, I was having a sleepover with some friends, and I watched Army of Darkness for the first time.
Oh, yay!
The only reason I gave that a pass was because I saw the ad for it in a comic book, and it looked like a Ray Harryhausen, like Jason the Argonauts type thing. So I was like, how could I go wrong with this? And that really was like, that was the gateway drug into horror for me, because I worked my way backwards through the Evil Dead trilogy. So by the time I got to the first one, I was just completely hooked, and realized that like all the fantastical stuff that I liked from like sci-fi and fantasy movies, that was like primarily my domain before that. All that stuff was in horror, just a little more intense with more serious consequences. And so, as I was becoming a teenager and getting a little older, my tastes changing, it like really started to appeal to me. And so from that point on, I've always had a love of horror movies.
And that's, you pursued a career in that. Was that your aim as you started to pursue a career in film? Did you always want to end up in that area? Because you've done a bunch of different stuff. It's not just horror movies. That's what you're known for. But you've also done makeup for regular movies and that kind of stuff. Yeah,
I mean, horror is a very like prominent genre. Like there's always going to be horror movies. I mean, I still feel like I'm more of a like sci-fi guy more than anything.
Okay.
But I do like love horror and will gladly play in that sandbox for the rest of my life. Because it's usually where all the makeup effects happen. That's kind of where makeup effects were developed. Obviously with like Dick Smith, and movies like The Exorcist, and Tom Savini and Friday the 13th. Like these are the movies where all these techniques kind of were initially developed. And so, I've really just in making prosthetics, it usually end up in some kind of horror scenario. Balls, slits, and bullet wounds, and chopped off heads and things. So
I have a friend who always makes a joke about this. The makeup award at the Oscars often goes to the movie that has somebody with a fake nose, because it never goes to a horror movie. But you always see somebody with a fake nose, which is the makeup. That's the extent of makeup and special effects in normal movies, as opposed to.
Well, I mean, character makeups are actually like the hardest thing to do. That's why that stuff that's honored at the Oscars. I mean, and that's not to diminish like gags, like prosthetic like gore gags for movies.
Right.
It's just I get that they typically steer towards something that's more character based. I guess it just seems classier, but I wish that like Nightmare on Elm Street got an Academy Award for makeup or something like that.
You really should have.
I'll see you in hell.
Tell him Freddy sent you.
Gregory, how about yourself? What was your introduction to the horror world?
I was 9 years old. My sisters had a VHS copy of what I would find out later was Cronenberg's The Brood. And they told me I should, under no circumstances, watch the movie, and it was time for me to go to bed. And so when they went to make popcorn, we were at somebody else's house at the time. We were all having a sleepover. I snuck under their couch. I slithered my live form under the couch, and I watched The Brood in secret under the couch with the double layer of like, the movie is actually, I shouldn't have watched it. I am absolutely terrified. And now I'm also terrified that I will be caught. And so that double compressing of fear meant that I was up the entire night. Like it was the first time in my young life I remember seeing the sunrise, because I had stayed up all night terrified that tiny children in snowsuits would crawl out from under my bed that I was sleeping in and murder me in the night. So it was perfect. It was like as scary as you could possibly make a movie is my first introduction to a horror movie.
It's a great movie. And good for you for being brave enough. Although you didn't really know what you were in for, I don't think, right?
It was a mistake. I maintain to this day, while it did affect me as a creator in like some great ways, it was a bad call on young Gregory. This was not a wise move. This was not the beginning of my wisdom, that is for sure.
And so for you, moving into when you started creating comics, what was your first foray into creating in the world of horror?
I had been working as the art director on this independent horror film called Agrosomnia. And we had tried a whole bunch of different creature effects, and we had designed a whole bunch of stuff that I could just tell. I mean, I was working closely with the director and the cinematographer, and I just knew what wasn't going to make it on the screen. And I really wanted it to exist. And so I included it as a story of things that we never saw in the film. Agrosomnia appeared as 3 parts in my Imagination Manifesto series. So that's when I really started to say, like, what is it about 2D representations of scary things that I can do that a film is not going to be able to accomplish? And I mean, it really underscored the idea that in comics, the budget is unlimited. It costs the same to draw someone doing the dishes as it does to draw a 10-foot shadow monster.
Jonathan, what about yourself? What was your first introduction into horror?
You know, in many ways, it was the film Return to Oz directed by Walter Murch. So if you know what movie I'm talking about. So again, because it's an Oz film, my parents, like many other parents who later complained, believed it was appropriate for children, which it is, barely appropriate for children. Yeah, it's a nightmare film. It's brilliant. I love it. Like, it begins, if you haven't seen Return to Oz, I really encourage you to seek it out. Murch was never really allowed to make another movie. It was the first one he was really allowed to make, and he was never really allowed to make another one by his financiers. But he, it opens with, Dorothy is in a mentalist asylum because she won't stop talking about how she's been to this magical land. This girl breaks out of the asylum with her. The girl ends up getting drowned in a river after they're chased by dogs. Dorothy wakes up. She's in Oz. Everybody has been turned to stone, but also they're headless. She finds like this, dark, queen who has a stockpile of heads and keeps replacing her head, with these other heads she's gathered. She's going to decapitate Dorothy, add her to the collection, and it goes on, from this point. It's got these terrifying, like, wheelies, they're called, these kind of half human, half motorcycle creatures. Like, it's a fascinating, like, strange, dark, surreal, film. And so that's the one that really kind of hooked me, and really got me kind of captivated by that sort of material, but also in just a broader sense, like, just to kind of go back to something I was saying before, like, my biggest influences are the surrealists. And so artistically speaking, and so this surrealist influence, of course, has been most powerful and enduring in horror. And then also it's a genre where I feel the audience is primed for extreme material. The audience is primed for risk taking. On the film side, you can make a film without a star. It's still possible for that reason to make a film on a feasible budget. Without having, while still being able to afford to take risks. And so I just feel like it combines a lot of my artistic influences and just general interests. And I think it's a really, but Return to Oz is what hooked me, initially. But what really deepened that was the Sandman issue that Neil Gaiman did. I think it was 6, if I can remember, where they're in the diner, and the Sandman doesn't even appear in the issue. It's just Dr. Destiny destroying people's lives in this diner, and it's this, and that all my material it really goes back to that Sandman issue, because I always am writing about people trapped in a room or in a situation that they can't get out of. They don't understand. They don't have power over it. And there's this sort of surreal, godlike authority who is controlling the scenario. And they can't understand his motivations. They don't know why, but they're stuck there, and they can't escape. That's, to me, like the DNA of horror that I'm interested in, is kind of in those two things.
You just metaphorically described the entire writing process too there. So
yeah, exactly. Especially in COVID here.
And so I want to come back around to that as far as what scares us and what you guys write about and create that's meant to scare other people. But I want to jump off what you said about films and horror films being able to take lots of risks and still be successful. Steve, you've got a lot of experience in this field. Is that something that attracted you to this genre when you started working in horror? Is that you could actually make something really good at a low budget, but still be really entertaining and attract an audience?
Yeah, I mean, because my like intro to horror was stuff like Evil Dead, that was like a little more on the fun side of things. and not necessarily like the classiest side of horror. It felt like for me, the appeal early on was it felt like the perfect kind of way for an emerging filmmaker to try and kind of figure out their style and just figure out the process of making movies. And yeah, being on a budget, like you don't need stars, you don't need a whole lot. You kind of just need, like for me, my impression at the time was that you just need a lot of gore and monsters and crazy shit. And that was all the stuff that I like to make. So yeah, that was definitely an appealing part of the horror genre to me, was being able to just like amplify the things that I thought I was pretty good at, and not dwell on the drama as much. I mean, as I got older and more experienced and my taste refined, I learned that like, the best horror movies are like just great movies, period, and they don't rely on the stuff that I necessarily thought they relied on early on, like with gore and that kind of like stylistic payoff with movies like The Exorcist or The Changeling or Blair Witch Project, like all these movies that utilize the unseen. So it's interesting to me that the horror genre can span like kind of the cheap trash fun of like low budget, but then also like more like high-minded like meticulously crafted things, like movies that like something like The Exorcist, that to me is just like a perfect movie. And the fact horror just covers that whole spectrum, like you can kind of go from one end to the other and it's all in the same genre, and it can still be entertaining just in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you, and certainly there's, even though the lower budget films and maybe the ones that don't have the best story or the best acting still have a lot to contribute to the genre, I think, because they're still fun to watch, right? And it's not always the most realistic, death or whatever, or most realistic way. I don't know how blood gushes. I'm sure you know more about it than I do, but you do it in an entertaining way, not necessarily in a realistic way, right?
Well, yeah, the analogy I'd always use, especially back in my days working at Movie Village, when I would steer people in the direction of like the horror section, my argument would always be like, well, it's better to watch a bad horror movie because it's still fun. Like I'd rather watch a bad horror movie than a bad drama or a bad comedy, because a bad comedy is just unwatchable.
Yeah, totally agree.
What's that, Greg? Say again.
I was just saying that's times 1,000. Yeah, like a bad drama is the worst, but a bad horror movie will really bring an entire group of people together in laughter and joy and exploration. Like you can celebrate it because of the effects of people, like like the work that you do, Steven, is what is the connective tissue, pun intended, I guess, of those horror movies, right? That you can be like, wow, that scene is so badly edited, but look at that effect is flawless, right? And it's those moments that keep you in it.
Well, and even when it's not flawless, you still have fun kind of dissecting it. Like it becomes such a fun like group activity. Whereas like a bad comedy where the jokes just aren't landing and you're sitting there in awkward silence, like that's the worst experience in the world. So I mean, like that's why like we're not going to get special editions of like shitty comedies from the 80s that nobody likes, but we'll get a special edition of like Spookies, like a movie that I never thought would be on Blu-ray in a million years, and it's got like a super edition that came out not too long ago, because it's a horror movie and it's got monsters and stuff and it's so bad it's good. So I think that's one great thing about the horror genre. While it is super difficult to make a good horror movie, I do think that like the bad ones still have their place in the genre, which makes it sets it apart from all other genres.
This place has been my home, my prison for an eternity.
What are you, nuts or something, lady? What's going on, damn it? Where are my friends? Tell me.
They're dead, Mr. Adam. As I am, as you are.
Do you know somebody then who can help me get a special edition of Kingdom of Spiders made?
Are you sure there isn't one?
There's a DVD,
I'd be surprised if there wasn't.
but I want a special edition. I want like William Shatner telling me the tales. I want,
I'm No, I'm just gonna
to be inside a spider.
Yeah,
let me
because
just
maybe all I really want is to sit with him while I watch it. Maybe that's it. Can you arrange that?
You said something
Well-
interesting where you're pointing out the difference between horror and other genres. And that point about the bad horror movies is a really great one. I hadn't ever thought about that before. Something else you said, which is, the best horror movies are just, good movies, and they also happen to be horror movies. I think there's an interesting thing that happens with the horror genre, which is another thing that kind of attracts me about it, which is that it has a cultural anxiety built around it, which is really specific to the genre. And it happens not just in movies, but also in books and other things. It goes all the way back to, authors like Baudelaire, who was put on trial for his poetry, which was too graphic and violent and vicious. But there's this whole cultural anxiety around horror as a genre, which I think is really interesting because it's an anxiety that gets thematized a lot inside of the stories, which is this idea that there's people who create it are monsters. It's a monstrous thing created by monsters that will breed other monsters. And there's a sort of this idea that the horror story is a cursed object, in a manner of speaking, and transmits a curse. And I find like that, so it has built into itself this weird meta level at which they're always on some sort of level about themselves as objects, whether you want them to be or not. As there's a lot of place in there for someone like me to play with this audience connection and this audience anxiety about their connection, which is kind of preloaded into the interaction between the horror story and, in whatever form it might take, and the person reading it or viewing it or what have you. I find those sorts of cultural baggage that horror has. It has, its downside. They don't get Oscars and so on, but it has this really interesting positive aspect on an artistic level where you can really play with the audience connection because it is so loaded.
It's like the way people go to see a magician, right? People go and see a magician. They know it's not real magic, but they want to be fooled, right? When people go to a horror movie, they want to be scared. And even if they can see how it's done, they'll still cheer. And I think that's it's that kind of that drive to be engaged in what is being presented that is unique among genre films. I mean, science fiction does it. Science fiction films they toe that line, they'll pull you in, but there's a lot more snobbery around a science fiction film. You'll get, there's an old statement about artists, right? You got to watch out for them because they mix with all classes of people. Horror movies are like that. They mix with all classes of audience in a way that a lot of films don't. And I think that that's really, where their power comes from.
Well, yeah, compare like going to a theater and watching a horror movie to like a drama, and it's like the audience interaction with a horror movie, and that feeling of like everybody kind of being there for the same thing, like that like kind of electricity in the theater is so unique to horror movies that it's just awesome. It makes it gives it this kind of like almost like mythical quality, like you're kind of doing like a little bit of like you're doing a thing you feel like you're not supposed to be doing, like it's this cursed thing that you're doing, but then also within that it's like this kind of like sense of community. Like it's weird that it's a thing that's like horrible and your parents tell you not to do, but then when you're doing it, you're kind of bonding with people over it, and it's like kind of the best way to experience a story.
Can we talk about creature design for a minute in movies? Because it's something, again, Steve, you have a lot of experience with it. Gregory, you've done quite a bit as well as far as designing, and I'm sure, Jonathan, you've envisioned many, many creatures and described them in your work. What makes a creature scary? How do you make a creature scary as opposed to just silly? And we've seen movies that do both. Steve, we'll start with you. And I can see behind you, I believe that is a model of the monster from the void. Is that correct?
Well, that's the screen used head from The Void.
Oh, there you go. Model, whatever. You made the movie. You get all the props.
Let me suggest an answer, and you guys tell me if I'm right. You take the inside and put it on the outside.
Yes. Yeah, you put some intestines on the mouth, and you always have some kind of skull-like features to it because everybody's scared of skulls, and you make the eyes black, and you're done. But my actual answer to that question is it's not quite as exciting, but I feel like the best monster design is not designing a monster and not showing anyone anything. Because to me, the scariest monster in any movie is the Blair Witch, and you don't see that witch. And that's the only movie that I've watched and rewatched, and every time I'm like, it's not going to get me this time. But I watch it and it just like chills me to the bone because my imagination is going nuts and it's being like, what is this thing that's after them? Is it just a guy? Is it actually a witch? Is it something else? So I think fear of the unknown is like the ultimate asset to your horror story, and no amount of intestine mouths and skull faces can match up to that. Personally, that's just my opinion.
I would expand on that. I agree 100%. I've been doing a bunch of creature designs and like some effect designs for some what are essentially going to be some low budget horror events, you almost want to call them. But what I keep asking the producers is, what are the uncertain things that we are going to leave uncertain, right? What part of it can I purposely not design because it won't show up on camera? You have to promise me there'll be some unseen part. And I beg for that. And usually you lose that argument, right? If you're just designing it on the page, they want the whole thing. They want a full turnaround. They want to see every aspect of it. And I try to implore every person that wants me to design a monster that the less of it we show, the more frightening it'll be. And that's not just because of the old Jaws trope of like, you know, just and that's scary. It's because once we see a thing, we can name it, we can define it, it loses its fear. We're not scared of things we can see. We're scared of what's around the corner. And yes. Horror does, one of the scariest moments in a horror movie I have ever seen is in the first Hellblazer, and it has nothing to do whatsoever with a monster. It has to do with where the camera is and where the audience has expectation for a disaster. There's this hooked nail that's sticking out in the attic, and you can see someone pulling a mattress closer, closer, closer. And the audience knows a certain thing, and the character is about to encounter an uncertain thing. And it's that, right? You see the tear, you see all that, but that's not the scary part. The scary part is like, oh man, just stop. Just don't do it. Right?
One of the other great examples of that is the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where there's almost no blood in that movie, but people remember there being a lot of blood in that movie because of the editing, especially when they put her on the meat hook. You hear a sound, you have him raise her, you hear a sound, but you never actually see the hook go in. But everybody remembers that hook going in. It's something you can even achieve in editing sometimes.
Pattering blood, you can hear it patter, but you don't see it.
But just to jump to your creature design question for a second, the way I like to think about it, what I think is the most scary kind of monster is the one that keeps changing form and shape. And then to Greg's point, there's an uncertainty about its actual definition. And so we're doing a book called The Eye Collector right now. And that's one of the things I kind of built in the script a little bit, is this thing has multiple forms, and each of its forms isn't necessarily the same every time. So Gregory had to bring that actually to life. But I did already kind of have that in as an idea, because it seemed to me that like The Thing by John Carpenter to me is one of the scariest monsters we actually see. The alien with its different forms and shapes, that we usually are see in darkness. But again, you never know what it's exactly going to look like when you look at it again. I always found those sorts of shifting and changing creatures to be, some of the most frightening. I think maybe for that reason you two are talking about, that there's an unknown or uncertain quality to them, because we don't exactly know what they're going to look like next time.
I don't know what the hell's in there, but it's weird and pissed off, whatever it is.
In both Alien and The Thing, you have this great bit where as soon as you think you know the rules of the monster, it's different. And so that uncertainty mark just moves and moves and moves and moves.
And there's a power inherent in that. Like, you know, that you have this sense of its power is suggested by that.
Yeah. Someone in the comments just said one word: tentacles.
Everyone loves tentacles.
Tentacles.
I was making fun of Gregory for how he likes to use tentacles, but I love them too.
I am so sick of tentacles, to be totally honest. I mean, they're cool and everything, but man, making them look good on the day on set has been a real shit show for me and a bane of my existence. I wish we didn't run so many tentacles into the void.
You got a lot in the void.
Practical tentacles, having to solve that problem. I draw them all the time because they're so evocative of that other. But having to make a physical prop of that, Steven, no way. I can't. I'm sorry every time I've ever suggested it in a design.
Well, also, like, I was just reading a script that I'm doing an effects breakdown for, and it has all these beats in it where it's like a tentacle reaches out of the darkness and grabs the thing. And I'm just like feeling like a knot in my gut of like, oh, great.
Another
thing a tentacle on set can't do. Like, I hate to be that guy, but like maybe you do that with VFX because it can be done, but I don't think typically you don't have like 50 grand to spend on one amazing tentacle. It's usually like, here's $20.
And you can only do the uncoiling in reverse trick so many times.
Still doing that one. That's one that I always fall back on because it does work. It definitely looks like what it is in the shop. It works.
You notice that the pant leg is moving strangely all of a sudden, right?
Yeah, and the rain is going the opposite direction, and
How do you guys decide how to scare people? What scares people? And this might tie into the creature design thing, but other than the monsters, what else scares people, Steve?
I mean, I'm going to go back to my previous answer of the unknown.
Yeah, okay.
More undefined something is, and the more the audience has to use their imagination to figure it out, and kind of like let the fear of what they think is going to happen overwhelm them more than actually showing them stuff. Then I think that's the best way to scare people in a movie.
Yeah, and for me, my answer would be what you want to do if you're writing a script or you're designing a comic sequence or you're putting a prose piece together. You want to set up connections and really strong bonds of love so that people know what's at stake. And then you just rip that all apart. Because that is, that's the pathos. That's where people come in and say, oh, look at how much that person has to lose. It was put to another way. I think, I forget where I saw this. Someone was saying that the best, if you want to just have feel-good movies, watch the first 10 minutes of every horror movie, because it always sets up the perfect family, the perfect vacation, the perfect drive in the woods. You just stop there. Man, what a great set of feel-good little clips those are, right? Then you're going to rip it apart.
I think very many respects, to me, it boils down to what's the fate worse than death? And that's the thing I always kind of come back to, is the idea that in the horror movie, unlike another genre, it's not, death is like the best thing that can happen to you. It's like that all your problems are solved but the monster will do a worse thing to you than death, or you will become the monster. The immortal vampire is cursed by its immortality. It's been removed from God's sight. Like, there's always ways in which there's something greater at stake than the thing we think is the biggest thing at stake conceptually in the horror. And so it does sort of at a certain point feed into this fear of the unknown idea. And then also I think it just helps to just think about what frightens you. Like, to me, like I always come back to feeling trapped and not having control. And any way that I can try to, but then in terms of engineering it into a experience for somebody, I'll look for techniques that put the audience into that position. So if I'm trying to if I've got a character who's trapped in this scenario, I'm going to try to come up with ways to make the audience feel trapped in the viewing experience, or the reading experience. Like I'll play with, on a page, I might play with like how the words are on the page to make them cramped if the character is in a cramped environment, or what have you. Like I'm always looking for some way to kind of make the character audience connect, or position the audience in an uncertain space relative to the monster. I find like the most frightening stories to me are ones where we're kind of put in this position where we're almost sort of we're being questioned. Almost our morality of watching or reading is being questioned by the thing we're watching or reading, in a manner of speaking. Psycho, the movie, does this. Psycho and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the two I always come back to, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre especially, because there's a great moment after the second or third kill where we're suddenly break from the formal logic of the horror film, where you follow up a victim, then they die, then you jump to another victim. You follow them, then they die, then you jump to another one. Instead, after they've died, we sit there with the monster for like about a minute, which breaks all the formal rules of almost every horror film. We're alone with the monster, and we see like Leatherface worrying. And then there's a split second where if you're kind of paying attention, or even on a subliminal level, you kind of get that, oh, from his point of view, people are invading his home. From his point of view, they're the monsters. And all of a sudden, like you're moved into this uncertain space as an audience as to who are you supposed to be identifying with. And it's a disturbing place to be, because now your moral position has been unsettled. And I find like the more I can kind of get the audience into that strange in-between space where they don't even know who they're supposed to be really feeling sorry for, in a manner of speaking, but without identifying with the monster. Because once they identify with that monster, it's over and it's not terrifying anymore. But if they're kind of like on the verge of understanding the thing, but they can never understand the thing, I think is an interesting kind of position to be in, because now you're unmoored from everything, and it's a weird feeling because you don't have a foundation.
If I have any more fun today, I don't think I'm going to be able to take it.
I recently went to one of those scary forest things, haunted hayride in the forest where they jump out and scare you, which have sprung up all over Winnipeg. I had no idea that there were so many here. And this one we went to, they're like, yeah, we've been operating for 4 years and and it is generally a series of jump scares. There was one moment in which I actually felt a little scared, and that was when they make you go through this tiny tunnel that keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller to go through this other thing, and I was getting a little claustrophobic. But my question, like, tons of people, even now, even during the pandemic when we're not supposed to be going out, tons of people are still going out and deliberately paying money to be scared. Why do we love this so much? Why do people love to be scared? Steven, start with you.
I really think it's because of the community aspect of it. It's a thing you can, like, go on a date and do, or like, go out with your buddies on a Saturday night and do. Like, it's a thing that you want to do with people. Like, I find it's always the most fun watching horror movies with others and getting like a group reaction, and especially like in a theater. I feel like some of my best experiences watching horror movies were in the theater. Like going to see Get Out opening weekend was pretty awesome, I gotta say. Like in a packed theater. Not sure when we'll get to experience that again, but yeah, like just seeing people reacting with everyone, and just being in a room full of strangers that for that 2 hours, like you're all on the same page and all in agreement that you're like shit terrified. Is just like, it's a really great experience and like super fun. So yeah, that's why I think we like being scared, because it's a thing we can share with others.
Gregory?
My take on this has more to do with the psychological aspect. I think part of it is that we are a somnambulant public that has almost no connection with the wild world anymore. I mean, I spend a lot of time outside, but not many people do. And part of your natural instinct that is not being exercised on a daily basis is awareness and alertness of potential danger on the peripheral of your senses. That's just, we evolved to have that, but we rarely use it anymore. And so, I mean, if you even think about what a scream is, right? A scream is a social cue that that group animals use. Monkeys do it, right? Particularly, they're a great example. They scream as a warning to their social group that there is danger, and then they all scream together in the hopes that it will scare that danger away, right? That is our evolution as a group, is to come together literally when you hear somebody scream. And so it's all of these things that are underpinning this unrequited emotional need we have to exercise that primal level, which, you know, thankfully I'm not being chased by a jaguar every other day. So I'll rather go to a horror movie to exercise that. And I think that's why we do it. We need it. We literally need to be scared in order to be a full person.
But
why do you have those emotions if not to use?
But I know many people who hate horror movies and they do not like to be scared.
They're the best audiences for horror movies, ironically. My daughter is like this. When I watch a scary movie, something terrifying happens, and I sit there and go, well, that was scary. That's interesting. But she, like, you know, but she's the perfect audience, which is the irony of the whole thing, isn't it?
Yeah, my wife would maintain that all four of us are broken inside a little bit, that we're not more frightened when we watch a horror movie.
Yeah, you summed it up perfectly how I watch horror movies now, which is like an insane scary thing happens and I go, huh, interesting.
Yeah. It's like how comedy writers write watch, you know, sets. They're like, oh, that was funny.
It's like, it's not really the reaction I think they want out of us, but that's just from watching, you know, decades of horror movies, I guess. We're just so totally jaded by it.
My answer to your question, Dan, is a kind of a philosophical one. Is I think horror is an interesting type of story from a structural standpoint, because you always have this monster in it. And within the story, like not necessarily in our world, but within the story's world, that monster is always symbolic of the truth that world wants to, it just can't acknowledge, because to acknowledge it would be to tear the order completely of their society apart. You know, if that monster is true, then everything falls down and reality disintegrates on a certain level, but the monster is true. And so I think in a weird sort of way, maybe not specifically story by story, but in a broad sense, I think we have this I think there's a level at which we understand that horror is the only genre that is telling us the truth, if that makes sense. Like there's a level at which if it's frightening because it's real, even if it's totally irreal and insane and like and not possible on any level, there's a structural way that the story works where the thing is always driving towards revelation.
Yeah,
you know, whatever that is.
You take a movie like Steven mentioned, The Exorcist as being like, you know, one of those all-time home run horror classics. It's really, if you unpack it the way you just described, Jonathan, The Exorcist is our fear that children need to be protected from much more than we think they do. And that if they can be possessed, then hell is real. And if hell is real, then God is real. And if God is real, then he's for sure judging us at the same time. And all of that gets packed down on top of just the fact that her head is turning around and green pea soup is spraying out of her mouth, right? You get all this stuff kind of packing in there.
Yeah, like I would consider The Exorcist to be a very conservative movie in many respects. And I, you know, wouldn't buy what it's selling, right? But I think that the structure of it is very much, you're moving towards we will go towards this truth, and we will not stop until we've reached the truth, is the structure of that story, you know? And I think that that's a compelling, I think we have this drive in us, not necessarily to seek truth, because people don't do that in reality, but we have this fascination and obsession with these things that are, we know that we want to go where we're told not to go. You know what I mean? Like, because there's something there, obviously. And what's there is more real than the things that we're being given to keep us away from there. I think that's the sort of the instinct that we follow, in a manner of speaking.
For me, The Exorcist has always been about how it legitimized, and it is real because we're dealing with the Catholic Church here, which is, you know, a massive institution, and, you know, millions and millions of people are Catholics and they follow this religion, and that, if that says that demons are real and they possess, then that makes it scarier to me. It does seem like one of the most realistic horror movies ever made.
Yeah, I find the only thing scary by The Exorcist is the possession concept itself, like the control laws. But I mean, you get into really personal things, like one person finds this scary, one person finds this scary. I think like as a group, you know, but we can all look at like the same movie and find different things scary because, but there's a structural level at which there's a few things that are always scary. We find transgression of a boundary to be scary, right? You know, like we want things to be, people to be dead or alive, right? But once they're somehow something of both, there's this terrifying quality to them now, and I think that there's a transgressiveness and an abnormality, and it gets very culturally specific, and it changes with time what we find scary. We look back at Dracula; it's no longer scary reading Dracula that he has money, but that was what a terrifying thing at the time, that this foreigner had money and could speak without an accent. That's what's frightening inside the text Dracula. Like what's being coded as frightening is a foreigner would pass as English. But now we find different things frightening.
It was a different time. But that speaks to what Steve was going on. Steve's talking about watching a horror movie with a group of friends, and that's because everybody's going to get something different out of it, right? Yeah, and that's why it's great to watch it with a group of people.
Damien!
Amen.
God! Defender of the human race!
Just to keep talking about how great The Exorcist is for a second.
Okay, sure.
I just want to point out that the thing upon recent rewatch of that movie that scares me the most is how totally useless the medical community is in that movie. How like Reagan goes to all these doctors and specialists and has all these appointments and gets all these tests and nothing comes out of it. And I feel like that is the most realistic horror in that movie. As I age and experience, you know, going to doctors more often and see people around me age and, you know, get illnesses and things, and seeing just how like hopeless the whole system is. I think in The Exorcist that really hits home, that like these doctors will just bounce you around and not solve the problem, but put you through like horrifyingly painful tests. And just the idea of like watching your child go through that was very traumatizing on the last watch that I did. But as far as like when I got totally like freaked out by a horror movie, I think there's a few cases, but the big one for me was when I rented Prince of Darkness for the first time.
Oh yeah.
I found that movie very bothersome. It's a weird story too, because I wanted to rent Hellraiser. I was like 14 or something at the time. My mom went to go rent me Hellraiser from Video Plus, and she looked at the box and deemed that it was too violent for me. So she decided to rent Prince of Darkness instead, because my mom and dad like went and saw it on a date when it came out, I guess, and they loved it. And they were also okay with me watching stuff that they had enjoyed. Like I could watch any R-rated movie that they deemed was like a good movie, and Prince of Darkness fell under that umbrella. So yeah, I watched Prince of Darkness with my friend Kieran like in junior high school, and I just remember walking him home that night and just thinking that the guy with the like bandage on his neck that's always giggling was just like hiding in the bushes that whole walk. And it was like a 10-minute walk, but I remember it felt like an hour because I was just so stressed out. But yeah, it's a very weird horror movie that, and for like, you know, a young teen, it's a lot to take in. It's a very like, that movie presents a lot of complex, weird ideas that really threw me off. And when I was just expecting like a fun schlocky horror movie, and what I got was something way more intellectual and way more bothersome in its weird imagery. So yeah, watching Prince of Darkness will always be one of my traumatizing horror experiences.
How about you, Greg?
Can I ask Steven a question about practical effects related to scares? Steven, as you're crafting, I mean, you have a long, list of credits is long. It includes some of my favorites, like working on the Hannibal show, which I just absolutely love, and Crimson Peak, and a bunch of other stuff. You get lots of credits. Is there ever a time when you know that the physical effect you've crafted only works a certain way, and the filmmakers are just not listening? And then
I hate to admit it, but that's like 90% of the time. And that's why we're always overbuilding, because they're always unclear on what they want. That's why I like building effects for my own things, because I know I'm going to see it from exactly this angle in this lighting. I know what works and what doesn't work about it. But I find, I don't know, more and more, like doing effects for other people's shows, like that conversation gets harder and harder, trying to explain to them, like, here is how this thing works. Here's how it needs to be shot. Here's how it needs to be lit. Here's the frame rate you need to use for it. Anything outside of this box is going to look like a pile of shitty rubber. And I find people like it's always a frustrating conversation. Sometimes it works. I feel like Guillermo obviously gets it, but there's certainly other directors who are just like, they expect you to make a thing that's just going to magically do everything and be perfect. Like the frustrating event that constantly repeats itself every time I make a creature or something for a TV show or a movie is you bring it to set dry. You haven't slimed it up yet, because slime and goo, especially for a creature, is like 90% of the work. You know, the light bounces off of it. You get like a nice edge light on it and it looks nice and gooey, like in John Carpenter's The Thing. Like, that movie's all about edge lighting these gross Rob Bottin monsters. But you bring the creature to set dry, because obviously you don't want to goop it up outside the studio. You do that like right before you roll camera. And there's always that look of disappointment from everyone where they're like, oh, that's it. It's just a rubber thing. And then you put goo on it, and then they're like, oh, that's great. Now it's totally come to life. It looks amazing. And so I wish that movies or just any production would have like a week-long boot camp where they brought producers and directors to the creature shop and just made them work for like a week to see like what it takes to make these things, and to see that they're just objects. They're just objects and appliances and things that don't just magically come to life on the day. It takes a whole crew to make it work. And so, yeah, I find a lot of times people just don't quite get it. And you end up having some very frustrating conversations.
There's an interesting equivalent in illustration where if you want to do it, you can do a really photorealistic rendering of a human face, but until you add some mistakes in the drawing, it doesn't look human, doesn't look real. You actually have to make a mistake on purpose sometimes if you're really good at a photo reference. And then the last real, like the equivalent of the goo to bring, like, say, a drawing of a person's face to life, is that tiny little bit of light that catches in the eye. Now, yep. It's always false because you're putting it in no matter what, no matter where the light is in the scene, in order to make it look more real, even though, in fact, if the way you've established the geography of your story, the lighting is far away and that light wouldn't show up that way. 100 times out of 100 times, the art director says, hey, can you bring it, it doesn't look quite right. And if I just put that light back in the eye, the false light in the eye, they're like, perfect. That looks so much better.
Yeah, totally. It's always like, oh, it's not sexy enough. Like, you just do that extra little thing and then you do that one unrealistic thing, or in my case, put goo on it. And then suddenly it's like, oh my God, it's so great now. So
I saw my problems could be solved putting goo on things.
Well, we put goo on our hands now, guys. We put goo on our hands every day. All right, we got to wrap things up. Thank you guys so much. Steve, your latest movie is Psycho Gorman, correct? Gorman?
Psycho Gorman.
PG for sure.
PG. It's a PG horror movie.
Guys, if you haven't seen Psycho Gorman, let me just tell you, this is going to be great. That's my endorsement.
In the meantime, we can all see The Void. The Void is streaming on Amazon Prime. Phenomenal film, just creepy as hell. I love it. You can see that monster behind Steve come to life. And Greg and Jonathan, you guys have a comic book out. Is it out right now, or when is it coming out?
It'll be November. We just got the actually date, November 8th.
It's saying November 18th, apparently, or right around there, is going to be out first at Comixology and direct from Heavy Metal, who's publishing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's it called?
The Eye Collector.
Available, and I'll put links to all this stuff in the description so people can check it out. But again, very cool.
Anyone who is curious about my work, who has found me because of Dragon Nanny, the book we did for young children, please do not order The Eye Collector for your young child as a follow-up.
Or do.
Well, no, don't. No, they'll be the 9-year-old me hiding under the couch during the Brood.
Here's the thing, guys. We all had experiences with horror at young ages. I didn't say mine, but mine was The Gate. That was my first horror movie that I watched when I was a kid. Terrified me, and we're fine. We're fine, right?
Clearly
We're
not.
well-adjusted people.
Clearly not.
All right. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for this. It's been a blast talking about it, and let's all watch some scary movies this weekend and celebrate Halloween.